Stories from Maine is a collection of true tales and legendary stories of daring, heroism, absurdity, disaster, and spectacle, all proving why many of the greatest legends in American history are our stories from Maine. In this, our first episode of 2025, you will hear the story of Westbrook, Maine's own Dorothy Appleby, who rose to fame and stardom in Hollywood. Then, we have the story of Rudy Vallee, America's first pop music superstar, who was also from Westbrook, Maine. And we will begin our new This Week in Maine History segment. So settle in, relax, and let us tell you a story or two. Our weekly podcast begins right now.
This is the Stories from Maine weekly podcast for the first week of January 2025.
Hello Maine, and Happy New Year. This week our Stories from Maine podcast changes from a monthly episode to a weekly podcast. And we are going to start off this episode with a new segment called This Week in Maine History. Then, we will follow that up with a biography of Maine's own second banana of Hollywood, Dorothy Appleby.
The book series, Stories from Maine, and Stories from Maine 2, are authored by Maine historian Lori Suzanne Dell. Her books are available from all booksellers and through Amazon. And, you can follow Stories from Maine on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify at Stories from Maine. You can also get the Stories from Maine gear on Etsy and on eBay.
This Week in Maine History takes us back to the first week of January in 1832, when a newly built statehouse in Augusta was completed, and the Maine state legislature moved from the original statehouse in Portland, 60 miles northward, to Augusta. The move was meant to make travel more equal for all of Maine's elected representatives. The original Maine statehouse in Portland, located at the corner of Congress Street and Myrtle Street, would later be destroyed during the Great Portland Fire of 1866. We will have more of This Week in Maine history later in this episode. And now, our first story focuses on a woman from Westbrook, Maine, who became a star of Broadway and a film actress who had appeared with many notable film stars. Then she teamed up with comedy legends Buster Keaton and the Three Stooges. So, let's head over to Oscar, who has the first of our stories from Maine, with the legend of actress Dorothy Appleby.
She was the apple of Maine's eye. From her discovery by screen legend Rudolph Valentino to her time as a fourth stooge, Dorothy Appleby was a Hollywood actress who appeared with legends and icons of stage and film in an entertainment career spanning 20 years. And Dorothy was from Westbrook, Maine. Dorothy Appleby began her life on January 6 of 1906 as the daughter of George and Nora Foley Appleby. She grew up with her older brother James and her younger sister Louise in Westbrook. Dorothy's father George owned and operated Appleby's lunchroom at 265 St. John Street in nearby Portland. Growing up in Westbrook, and like many of the young girls of her time, young Dorothy dreamed of stardom, fame, and fortune. She was a beautiful girl with uncommonly good looks and an outgoing personality. By 1923, Dorothy was a young lady of 17 years when she entered in the Mineral Lava Beauty Contest, sponsored by Hollywood heartthrob Rudolph Valentino. The contest visited each state and finally made it to Maine. Little Dorothy won the Maine pageant and a trip to the final contest at Madison Square Garden in New York City. In the end, she lost the National Beauty Contest, but her acting career was just about to begin. By December of 1924, Dorothy landed a 3-week Broadway musical role in the stage production of Princess April as supporting character Marjorie Hale at the Ambassador Theater. By February, she landed another performing role in Puzzles of 1925 at the Fulton Theater. She would go on to perform in 3 more Broadway productions between 1926 and 1933. Her performances in Square Crooks, Young Sinners, and Springtime for Henry won her popularity with audiences at the New Yorker Theater, Maraska Theater, and Daly's 63rd Street Theater. In 1927, Hollywood called upon Dorothy while she was still working on Broadway. She was given a small unaccredited role in the silent film Paradise for Two. Then, the same year, she also appeared in an unaccredited role as another young girl in the film New York, with screen sensation William Powell. By 1928, she got to reprise her 1926 Broadway role in her first credited silent film role as Kay Ellison in the Hollywood version of the Broadway play Square Crooks. Dorothy would go on to play bit parts in another 5 films between 1931 and 1934. Then, she got her first starring role. In 1934, Dorothy landed her first starring role as the daughter of a prison warden in the film Jailbirds of Paradise. In this film, Dorothy teams up with the Pre-Stooges slapstick comedy duo of brothers Moe and Curly Howard. Although the film short was not considered a Hollywood blockbuster, Dorothy was now launched as a starring actress, and her association with Hollywood's soon-to-be Three Stooges was underway. Despite her starring role in Jailbirds of Paradise, Dorothy's career was still slow going. Between 1934 and 1937, she landed only 9 parts in various films, and all were smaller co-starring roles. Then, she landed her next starring role in the 1937 film Paradise Express. But her work as a leading actress was failing to wow audiences. Her roles now became small bit parts, and many were not even large enough roles to warrant formal film credits. Dorothy's career was tanking. By 1939, Portland, Maine's own Hollywood legend John Ford was making his legendary film Stagecoach with John Wayne, and Dorothy landed a small unaccredited role as a saloon girl. It was Hollywood's golden year, and Stagecoach was a blockbuster hit. But even fellow Mainer John Ford couldn't save Dorothy Appleby's fledgling Hollywood career as a dramatic actress. Then, in 1940, Dorothy found her calling as a comedic sidekick when she landed a co-starring role with Buster Keaton in the film Nothing But Pleasure. She then followed this film with her first Three Stooges film, Rocking Through the Rockies.
We will be right back with the conclusion of our story.
We hope you are enjoying our all-new Stories from Maine weekly podcast. And we hope you will come back each Monday for the next weekly episode. So, please like, follow, subscribe, and bookmark Stories from Maine, and come back again next week for more true legends of Maine.
Our next segment of This Week in Maine History takes us back to the first week of January in 1880, when Maine Civil War hero, former governor, and 6th president of Bowdoin College, Joshua Chamberlain, was appointed to stand watch over the State House in Augusta, while angry voters threatened to storm the capital of Maine. The close election of the previous month left no clear winner in the race for Maine governor, which forced the election to be decided by Maine's Superior Court. For nearly 2 weeks, Chamberlain eats and sleeps in the State House and stands guard, fending off would-be rioters who threatened his life as they attempted a coup d'état. Chamberlain's efforts allowed Maine's highest court to decide the election and install the true elected winner. This infamous event in Maine's illustrious history is better known today as the Countout Crisis of 1880.
Each week, Lori Suzanne Dell's column, Stories from Maine, appears in the weekly edition of the Brunswick, Maine newspaper, The Times-Record. Follow us on Facebook at Stories from Maine and read these articles for free each week. Just go to www.facebook.com/Stories from Maine.
Now, let's go back to Oscar for the conclusion of our story of Hollywood actress Dorothy Appleby.
For the rest of her career in Hollywood, Dorothy Appleby zigzagged back and forth from films with Buster Keaton to film shorts with the Three Stooges. And in between, she would try again and again to land dramatic roles. But it was clear that her dramatic career was over and her comedic career would leave her relegated to the limiting roles of a second banana. By 1943, after landing another unaccredited role as a dancing partner in the film Small Town Deb, Dorothy married musician and big band leader Paul Drake and retired from acting. She and Paul spent the rest of their lives living on New York's Long Island. Then, on August 9th of 1990, Dorothy Appleby died at Hicksville in New York. She was 84 years old. Her remains were returned home to Maine and buried in the family plot at the Forest City Cemetery in South Portland. Although her career had lukewarm success, Dorothy was looked upon by many of Maine's young women as a great Maine success story. From a Maine beauty pageant, to the stages of Broadway, and finally to the film sets of Hollywood, Dorothy Appleby performed with many notable legends of Tinseltown, and she lived a life many would kill for. With little to no training as an actress, Dorothy Appleby left the rocky coast of Maine and made it to the bright lights of Broadway and then to the sandy shores of California to reach for her dreams and, for a brief time, experience both the accolades of stardom, fame, and fortune. And today, Dorothy Appleby is one of the many Maine faces of Hollywood whose impressive visage lives on. And now, the life and legend of Dorothy Appleby is one of the more notable of our Hollywood stories from Maine.
Our next story will highlight another great superstar of entertainment, when our Stories from Maine podcast continues in just a few moments.
Stories from Maine are a collection of true tales from America's 23rd state. These stories combine the facts with the lore, legends, newspaper reports, genealogical information, and many other sources that have recorded the true history of Maine and her people. If you enjoy these stories, you can get author and historian Lori Suzanne Dell's books through Amazon or from your favorite book retailer. And you can follow Stories from Maine on our Facebook page, on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. And you can find our Stories from Maine gear on eBay or on Etsy.
Ever wonder why there are no billboards in the Pine Tree State? Our next This Week in Maine History segment takes us back to the first week of 1978, to a time when there were so many billboard signs along the highways and roadways of Maine that they became visual hazards to driving and were seen as ugly eyesores. Responding to the will of the people, the Maine legislature acted by passing a law forever banning billboard signs in the state of Maine. We'll go back to Oscar with our second story in just a moment.
Our next Stories from Maine weekly podcast will stream on Wednesday, January 8, 2025. So follow us on Spotify and join us again next week as we bring you the true tale of a Maine murder from 1808 that made New England history, and learn about the modern-day local effort to solve an enduring and important mystery that has lingered for more than 217 years.
This next story is about the first pop superstar in world history. His iconic style and musical talent led him from radio to Hollywood films and many appearances on television shows in the 1960s. And, like Dorothy Appleby, this legend of the Pine Tree State was also from Westbrook, Maine. Let's go back now to Oscar and the story of America's first pop superstar, Rudy Vallee.
In the early days of radio, one young man from Westbrook, Maine became the first pop superstar in American entertainment history. Hubert Pryor Vallee was born on July 28 of 1901 to Charles and Catherine Vallee at Island Pond in Vermont. One sister and one brother had died before Hubert was born. Another brother and sister would soon follow and be raised alongside young Hubert. But the Vallees soon left Vermont and moved east to Westbrook, Maine, where Charles opened a pharmacy, and the Vallee children were raised and educated in the local schools. Growing up, young Hubert played in the Westbrook High School band, and it was there that he honed his musical talents. And when Hubert wasn't practicing, he often worked in the drugstore, where a soda fountain was one of the more popular draws to the business. Hubert Vallee learned to play the drums, piano, clarinet, saxophone, and a number of other musical instruments. He also learned to conduct and eventually honed his singing skills as well. By 1917, the United States entered World War I, and young Rudy, wanting to seek adventure and perform his patriotic duty, enlisted in the United States Navy while still a student at Westbrook. But when the Navy realized that Rudy was just 15 years old, they gave him an honorable discharge and sent him back home to Westbrook. There, Rudy worked to finish his high school education and graduated from Westbrook High School in 1919. Hubert soon after changed his name to Rudy Vallee. Then, after graduation, Vallee joined up with traveling bands and took to the road, and he spent time in England playing with an orchestra. He later returned home to the Pine Tree State and attended the University of Maine, and eventually formed the band the Connecticut Yankees. Together with his Yankees, Vallee soon recorded his legendary college hit, the Maine Stein Song, while at the University of Maine. The song is still the legendary school song for the University of Maine. Rudy Vallee and his Connecticut Yankees then toured New England and New York, as well as many other states, and played smaller dance halls, clubs, and venues anywhere they could find booking. They found popularity with young people everywhere they went. When Rudy and his Yankees played a series of venues in New York, they caught the attention of record producers who wished to capitalize on the group's rising popularity. Many young girls swooned over Rudy's raspy, sweet voice, and his use of a megaphone gave him a fresh and unique style. And the fast beat and swooning tunes of the Yankees made them instant hits. By 1928, Vallee and his Yankees had signed a recording contract with Harmony Records and were quickly scheduled to perform on numerous radio programs and at large public events. By the end of the year, Rudy Vallee and his Connecticut Yankees were a smash hit with over 2 million radio listeners, thrusting the band into superstardom. Young radio listeners soon began flooding Vallee's public appearances and buying up their records. By 1929, Vallee and his Yankees were featured in what could be called an early music video. This short film featured Vallee and his Yankees playing a number of their hit songs. The short film was played at theaters everywhere. Then, in that same year, Vallee and his band were given their own radio show, and Rudy also appeared in his first film, The Vagabond Lover. Before the end of 1929, Rudy Vallee and his Connecticut Yankees had become the first true pop stars in American music history. And Vallee's signature radio greeting, "Hi-ho, everybody," became a popular catchphrase that was echoed by young listeners everywhere. Through the 1930s, Vallee continued his meteoric success, and despite the devastating effects of the Great Depression, the band commanded a record $13,000 per week for appearances at clubs and concert venues. Vallee was so popular that he was even made into a cartoon caricature in a Betty Boop cartoon. For the next 10 years, Rudy Vallee and his Connecticut Yankees continued to travel, cut records, and appear in films. And Rudy Vallee and his Yankees also helped to inspire the big band era of music in the 1930s and 40s. After the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941, Rudy Vallee once again enlisted to serve in military duty to his nation. Yet, this time, Vallee signed up for the United States Coast Guard and served there during World War II, rising to the rank of lieutenant. After the war, Vallee returned to his storied entertainment career. When the war ended, the nation and the world had changed. Although Vallee and his band were still popular, the rise of a great many popular big band leaders saw Vallee's group wane a bit in popularity. But Vallee still found himself quite popular in films and the new medium of television. In all, Rudy Vallee had appeared or starred in 34 films between his first short film in 1929 and the start of 1955, when Vallee began appearing on television. For the next 10 years, Vallee appeared in comedic sketch programs, variety shows, and dramatic theater shows on television. His last television appearance would come in 1986, completing a 57-year career in film and television. He had even earned himself a star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame. Throughout his life, Valli continued to be active in music, where he recorded more than 160 singles, while also appearing in more than 60 films, dozens of radio programs, and he enjoyed a popular television career through the 1960s and 1970s. And in the 1960s, Rudy Valli appeared on Broadway as J.B. Bigley in the 1961 musical hit, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. Yet, despite his years of radio superstardom and success in films and on Broadway, one of his most remembered appearances was on a kitschy television show where Valli portrayed a villain, Lord Marmaduke Fogg, in the popular Batman television series. Throughout his life, Valli kept close to his Maine roots. He returned often to visit his family in Westbrook, and he maintained a camp at Keezer Lake. Rudy Valli was married 4 times and had no children. Today, Rudy Valli's Westbrook home is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and there's a small statue of Valli on Main Street, just outside the location where his father's pharmacy was located. Sadly, Rudy Valli died on July 3rd of 1986, just shy of his 85th birthday. He is buried at the St. Hyacinth Cemetery in Westbrook. Rudy Valli had risen to fame and superstardom popularity and was the very first super pop star in American music history. And Rudy Valli was a true legend in music, film, Broadway, and in television. And today, the true and legendary tale of this son of Westbrook, Maine, affectionately known to the world as Rudy Valli, remains one of the greatest musical legends of America and one of the very best of our stories from Maine.
In our next This Week in Maine History, we go to the first week of 1995, when long-serving Senate Majority Leader and Waterville resident, George J. Mitchell, leaves his post as the Majority Leader of the United States Senate to accept a presidential appointment as a special envoy to Northern Ireland. During his tenure, Mitchell helps to broker a peace accord, which brings the long-held factional violence between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland to an end.
We here at Stories from Maine hope you have enjoyed this week's podcast. Join us again next week for another episode. Until then, please like, subscribe, comment, and share Stories from Maine on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify. The Stories from Maine books, articles, video, and podcast content are copyright 2024. The Stories from Maine logo is a registered trademark of Lori Suzanne Dell. Reproduction or use of any portion of the Stories from Maine podcast, or any of the Stories from Maine content, is prohibited without permission. If you wish to use any of our content, just send us an email at storiesfrommaine@gmail.com. And remember, Lori Suzanne's books are available through any major book retailer or through Amazon. Please like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify at Stories from Maine.